Well, the Ford Foundation, for instance, told me that they thought we were too liberal and too controversial, and that we would endanger their cultural programs in Austria. I mean, the first festival was being held in Vienna. It was not encouraging at all, and the private individuals to whom I went often had particular points of view to put forward, which would have been much, much more restricting than the CIA funds were, which were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
What do you mean they were free? You mean to say it was easier for you to work for the CIA than a private organization?
That's right. And the reason I think that comes as a surprise, as it did to me at the time. I mean, I had the conventional liberals' view of the CIA as a right-wing incendiary group, and I was amazed to discover that this was far from the case, that they were enlightened, liberal, nonpartisan activists of the sort who characterized the Kennedy administration, for instance.
You have not been working now for the CIA since 1962.
Mm.
You still criticize. You were down recently in Washington?
Yes, when the story broke that I had once been, that I have for 4 years been a Central Intelligence agent, I was demonstrating outside the Pentagon underneath Mr. McNamara's office against bombing in Vietnam. And this didn't precisely fit with the image of a CIA agent, but then neither does the CIA.
What does former member of the CIA mean? There is the literalist interpretation, and in Berkeley you've all read Idries Shah, and you know you should never trust the literalist interpretation of anything. The literalist interpretation is a former CIA agent is somebody who's quit the agency and has no contact with them anymore. And then there's the esoteric interpretation, or the allegorical interpretation, which is that a former CIA agent is somebody who's been assigned to something so dirty the agency doesn't want it traced back to them. And so he's officially not on the books anymore, but he's being paid through a numbered bank account in Switzerland.
Regarding the feminist movement, what does the slogan, "Make the personal political," mean?
To me, I always hated that slogan. What it really means is you take your personal damage. And one of the things that's very obvious in those very early days of the women's movement, how many of the radical women leaders of the movement themselves had really disturbed backgrounds and were very, very violent. And then you make that political. So if my dad's a shit, all men are shits. If you say that, you can do almost anything you like. You could go from the personal and make it political. So what happened is a sufficient group of women got together to complain bitterly, because you have to remember the beginning of the feminist movement was a Marxist movement. It was women in the left of the politics in Britain who decided that they had had enough of working with men on the left and were going to have their own, in quotes, movement. So our feminist movement never grew from a grassroots of the working class women that they were always talking about. There weren't any working class women. It was actually academics, university lecturers, young women students was the beginning of the movement.
We have been advancing the cause of white women ever since the women's movement. The women's movement was a movement for white women. They might as well have been wearing placards that said, "Black women need not apply." And that was only allowed to happen is because we wanted to stop the civil rights movement. And white men went along with that in order to put a stop to the civil rights movement. As long as we're talking about the rights of white women, then we don't have to talk about the rights of people of other colors. As far as I'm concerned, that's what the women's movement was about. Now there's going to be another women's movement. You need to realize this. If you haven't read Ben Wattenberg's book, The Birth of Earth, you need to realize that in this country right now, we've got a whole lot of white folks who are scared to death because they know that within 30 years, white people will have lost their numerical majority in the United States of America. And if you haven't read that book, in which he says, the biggest problem confronting this country today is there are too few white babies being born in this country. If we don't solve this problem and solve it quickly, white people will lose their numerical majority, and this will no longer be a